Mr. Mayor,
How are you?
good. How are you? Good to see you again.
Thank you very much. Good seeing you, Quinn.
How have you been?
Good, good. Busy, but all good. Good,
Good.
busy.
I almost wore my suit, but I didn't want to outshine you.
That's all good, brother. Whatever makes you good for you. I'm easy. Low maintenance, I like to say.
It's funny. I was just thinking you. I saw the 60 Minutes interview that you did with Anderson Cooper,
hmm
uh, and you were talking a lot about swagger, and that's something that they said my father had, and you remind me a lot of my dad a little bit.
Mm.
You guys have that same swagger, and swagger is really just confidence in the end, knowing that you can. And speaking of which, I wanted to ask you, what was your childhood like growing up, and when did you really figure out that moment come when say, okay, I have this thing, dyslexia. Now how am I going to learn to deal with it?
It's interesting that the beginning of my childhood, I just felt as though I couldn't learn. And, during that time when you're growing up through K through 12, children can be sort of cruel if you don't keep up.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how it could impact your confidence as you're moving about. And, some of the children were extremely hurtful. They would leave a sign on the back of the chair, the dumb student. And I resented when teachers would call on me to read because I just really couldn't formalize the letters and connect the sounds of the letters with the actual words. And then even something as simple as writing an essay, you just have so many errors. And what people would think were common words, like something simple as, enough, ENOUGH.
Yeah.
The different sounds of words in our language, you could have a pronunciation that's the same. So over time, it just plays on your confidence. And sometimes you think the child is being quiet when in fact they're just trying to sort of hide out and not be visibly present. And so it wasn't until I got into college, I was in the library studying, 'cause I had to study hard and long. And I heard someone in the other aisle talk about listening to a documentary on dyslexia. And I took it out after they were finished. And once I heard it, it was like it was like a load lifted off my shoulder that you're not dumb, you're dyslexic. And it was just I cannot tell you how it was just an excitement that here was something that was in my span of control and not something that was out of my span of control.
So one of my campaigns that I have is to try to change the phrase from learning disabilities to learning differences, because I'm trying to get all the support that I can in Congress, just anywhere I can to make that happen, because the more I talk about it, the more I do research, the more I realize that you can't compare somebody who learns differently to somebody who has an actual disability. And it's nothing against people who have disabilities. I technically have a disability. But I wanted to know what your thoughts on that would be if you supported that change.
I was just in a school. I attended a school the other day, and I said to the students who were all dyslexic that you learn differently. And I said that I believe we should stop using the term disability and start saying that we learn differently, because there are a large range of how one comprehends information. And because your mind operates with that comprehension differently, it does not mean you're disabled. We've created this norm, and if everyone doesn't fit neatly into this norm, we tend to identify them as disabled. Just as Michael Jordan was a great basketball player, he didn't fit into the norm. We won't call him disabled because he doesn't fit into the norm. The norm, some of us exceed the norm, and some of us may move further to what the norm is. So I strongly agree with you. The instructor said they use the term disability so that they can get the proper funding that's associated with it. But I think it's more harmful than helpful.
So would you put a good word in for me for the U.S. Congress, write to them?
Yes, I would. I support the concept.
I appreciate that so much. Tell me about your parents and who are you close to more, and how they helped you, or I guess deal with back then, really. My father always said, I don't deal with you, I live with you. And I was just wondering how your parents raised you and helped you to succeed in life.
Well, mom was amazing, and I was extremely close to her. I lost her about a year and a half ago, but it was clear that it was a different time. During the time I was a child, these concepts of dyslexia, ADD, and some of the other terminologies that we use now wasn't as visibly known, and there weren't any real services. The instructions I received from my teachers was you just need to study harder. You are not giving it your all, you're being lazy, etc. But I think mom internally probably knew something was wrong. And there's so many dynamics because particularly in the African-American community and communities of color, mothers were afraid to have their children labeled because once they were labeled, they would be placed on a certain track where college was not an option. It was always encouraged, go to the trade school, which we learn now is really a great skill to have. But many parents were afraid of having their children labeled. And I think that my mother thought that if she just continued to study hard with me, that I would be able to comprehend the information. But in reality, it was not her fault or her doing. It was just I learned differently, and no one identified how I learned differently.
Growing up differently, I've always felt a connection to people of all color, to people who of any color, to people who are just considered different. Because when you're labeled different, you might as well be with another race that is underlined, I guess, if you will. They're not as considered as important to society then, and it's a shame because we're all equal, we're all the same, and it doesn't matter if you have a disability or not. So I've always related to everybody else who is different. And I read two articles actually, that say you actually have more of a chance of becoming a successful millionaire if you have dyslexia and not. So you can shove that into everybody's face.
It's fascinating that you state that because I cannot tell you how many times I'm in a room with successful people who either own their own companies or they're doing something extremely innovative. And they share with me that, hey, Eric, I'm dyslexic. And so there's something that I believe that's connected to knowing that you have to do things differently and you have to learn how to adjust. And you also reach a point where nothing becomes too challenging for you, and you know that you have to push through no matter how difficult it is. So I think that there's something you grow into, realizing your differences and how you must adjust to them.
When did you first become interested in politics, and were you worried that your dyslexia was going to get in the way?
No, actually, I believe it assisted me in many ways. And my interest came almost 28 years ago when I saw the failures of education and the failure of governmental services in assisting and preventing people from going down the wrong paths. And I just embarked upon that career, and being dyslexic was not even a second thought because I was already at a place where I knew how to make those adjustments and I knew how I could comprehend the information. And it's just really empowered me to know how to just stay focused and continue to push through. And in politics, that is a trait you must have.
Yeah. were you, did you always want to be mayor of New York?
Not all my life, but 28 years ago, I started this journey and I have not moved from it. People used to say all the time in the last 20 something years, I would talk about being the mayor. And it was a while before they say, wait a minute, this guy is serious, but it was about improving the lives of people. It was not, I wanted to be mayor just to have a title. I wanted to be mayor because I thought that my observations of how the systems and cities were failing people, we had an obligation to correct them. And so I brought a unique perspective to being the mayor. Number one, having a learning disability, having problems with the law, a negative encounter as a young man and a police officer, growing up on the verge of poverty, mom raising 6 children for the most part on her own, and just going through my law enforcement experience and seeing firsthand on things people encounter. So when you look at the role of a mayor, I'm probably one of the few modern day mayors in this city that came from a blue collar civil service background that went through the governmental agencies. So I was able to see firsthand the failures and the success.
It's always, I remember even when I was a kid, I'm 40 years old. Now, even when I was a kid, there were 3 classes. There was poor, middle class, and rich. And now it's just, and I'm fortunate that I come from an upper class family. But my dad always told me how lucky you are to have the things you are. And now it's just, you're either rich or you're poor almost. And the middle of America used to be the V8 engine, as I call it, of America. It used to really run things, and now it's just the rich that run America. So, and especially with schools, because if you come from a poor neighborhood, your chances are going to be almost nil of getting into an Ivy League school or a good school. So my question to you is, what are you doing, especially to help people with disabilities get into those good schools?
That's a great question, and it's more than just getting into a good school, it's to have a good life. No matter if you go to what one was considered to be Ivy League school, or if you go to CUNY, which I attended, we want to provide people with the skills that they need so that education and obtaining those skills are not going to be filled with man-made barriers. And that's why we are doing dyslexia and phonic literacy screening in all of our schools, so that we won't put our young people on the pathway to incarceration. Because if you don't educate, you will incarcerate. It is mind-boggling that we knew 30 to 40% of our young people and adults that are in our prison system are dyslexic. It should have been, what do we do to prevent? And that is our goal, to create pathways to place people on the right pathway instead of a pathway of homelessness and others. And then we also looking at how do we help those who we are pulling out of the river, I like to say downstream. How do we go upstream and prevent them from falling in? And when you do an analysis of who we pull out of downstream, break down those numbers, and then you can start seeing how you give the support upstream, like foster care children. We knew that many of our foster care children, they age out without the support they deserve, and they fall into that river, in the river of homelessness, incarceration, unemployment, mental health issues. So we are now supporting our foster care children with something called Fair Futures, to allow them to have life coaches until they're 26. We also are helping them with their college tuition, $15,000 a year and $60 a day in stipend, so that they could continue to provide for themselves. But that's the type of work we're doing, from the dyslexia screening to leaning into foster care, identifying those children with mental health illnesses, because we believe we can prevent some of these crises if we catch them early enough. And that is what we're going to continue to do.
You and my dad actually do have another thing in common other than swagger. And that is my father was actually in jail for a couple nights back in the day when he was a young kid in Boston. And I learned that you were in actual prison for a while. And so my question to you is, if somebody with dyslexia or has mental disabilities and they commit a crime, do you put them in prison, or they'll get a fair trial, and if they're convicted, do you put them in prison, just lock away the key, or do you get them the correct help that they need?
Yes, and I was never in prison. I was arrested as a child.
Arrested.
Yeah, that's okay. I was arrested as a child and I had to go to Spofford Juvenile Facility in the Bronx, which is now converted into a housing and is being used to help the community up there. And that's just a footnote. But when we find someone that is dyslexic, has a learning disability, and unfortunately, even in cases when they have mental health illnesses, they are arrested for those crimes. And we need to think differently about that to give people the services that they need instead of believing the answer is only incarceration. Our goal is to also test men and women that are in jail so that we identify that they're dyslexic. We can give them the support and help they need while they are incarcerated. So when they come back into mainstream society, they could come back getting the support they needed so they could be gainfully employed and won't be part of that evolving door of criminal justice system.
My family has a farm in St. Mary's County in Southern Maryland. And on our way there, we go through Anacostia, which is the poorest town in DC. And the trash is just horrible. And I remember that sometimes they would let, inmates who are on good behavior, let them go outside and help pick up trash for community service. And I was just wondering if you guys have something like that in the state of New York.
Yes, there are various forms of.
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, Mr. Mayor, but that also to help the environment too.
No, we don't have that exact program, but there are various forms of work release programs that are used to allow people to reacquaint themselves into society. But that's a great idea of how do you use that type of prison working to assist in the city. We have something called Concraft, that is the furniture company for governmental furniture. And those who are prisoners are allowed to work to build the furniture and they get a small stipend for doing so. But I think helping the environment in any way that we can assist, those who are incarcerated so they can start paying their debt to society, but also society has an obligation to pay the debt to them because many people, I believe, are incarcerated based on our failures and betrayals.
So one of my last question is to you is if anybody, young person is interested in running for politics or mayor with dyslexia or a learning difference, would you encourage them to do so?
Yes, I would, because when you have gone through a lot, you could help people who are going through a lot. And it's one thing to have academic achievement, but personal experience and that personal education plays a vital role in your ability to assist those who are in need. And so I would encourage anyone who has hit a bend in the road in their life and made the decision it's not the end of the road. They should share those skills and share the mindset to help other people who are at that bend of the road. They could make that turn. It's all about making a turn. And when you've gone through those mistakes, those errors, you could assist others to make that turn. I like to say I'm perfectly imperfect, and I want to use that imperfection to help people reach the goals that they are achieving.
You better trademark that, because I just thought I could use that for my next book. My last question for you is what words of inspiration do you have for people like you and me who are just upcoming, just in general?
I'm very inspired. I think there's a cosmic shift in that people are learning how to turn their pain into purpose. And I don't think any life is more rewarding than having a purposeful, driven life. And more people are not just looking to sit behind a desk or chair somewhere and make widgets. They're looking to say, how could I make a meaningful change in the lives of people I come in contact with? And that's a great feeling. And I think that optimism is going to move our country, if not our globe, in the right direction.
Mr. Mayor, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Take care. Good to see you again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.